Born 60 years ago in La Chaux-de-Fonds in Switzerland, Philippe Lazzarini has spent more than 30 years trying to heal the ravages of war, from Bosnia to Lebanon, from Rwanda to Iraq. Today he is at the heart of a global storm.
When I took this position 4 years ago, jokingly I said, I hope I will be the last Commissioner General. But at that time, I had a rather more positive solution in mind. I hoped for a revitalized peace process and that the question of Palestinian refugees would be dealt with once and for all. Of course, I was very far from imagining that this issue of the last Commissioner General, maybe it will be me, maybe not, would be so dramatic.
For years, the UN agency in charge of Palestinian refugees has been the target of Israeli authorities. But today, its situation and very survival is under threat. On the morning of October 7, 2023, members of Hamas infiltrated Israel and committed an unprecedented massacre, killing nearly 1,200 Israelis, most of them civilians. Shock and horror. Israel's response was almost immediate. To this day, more than 32,000 Palestinians have been killed, mostly women and children. While bombs rained down on Gaza, in late January, accusations were directed at UNRWA. Israel claims that 12 of the agency's employees were involved in Hamas's deadly attack. Since then, Israel has multiplied its accusations, bringing the whole organization under suspicion.
UNRWA has been proven to be an instrumental part of Hamas's terror machine. UNRWA, even before Hamas hijacked it in Gaza, has always been part of the problem and never part of the solution.
The main accusation was that 12 of our employees allegedly took part in the attacks on the 7th of October. I was completely horrified when I heard this claim. And I immediately implemented some measures. The first was to fire the 12 employees, even before having carried out a review or knowing if there were grounds to these allegations. Secondly, I went to see Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and we both agreed that a commission of investigation should be put in place as soon as possible to establish the facts.
Today, this organization, which is vital to the Palestinians, is being asphyxiated. The main donor states who fund UNRWA have turned their backs on it. As the devastation of Gaza continues, Philippe Lazzarini must fend off accusations and defend his organization while convincing contributor countries to prevent the ship from sinking. It's now a race against time. This will decide if UNRWA survives, but also decide the fate of hundreds of thousands of refugees in Gaza and millions of others in the region.
The agency is hanging by a thread, and not just financially. It's also hanging by a thread politically. We have heard the Israeli authorities say they no longer want to see UNRWA in Gaza. UNRWA is also under pressure to leave Jerusalem, and in fact, in reality, there's also pressure for UNRWA to cease its activities in the West Bank.
Constantly challenged by Israel, the agency nevertheless plays a vital role in the Middle East and has done so for the past 75 years. In 1948, 700,000 Palestinians were forced into exile after the creation of the State of Israel. UNRWA was created a year later to bring aid to these refugees as a temporary measure before a political solution is found. It caters to the basic needs of this population in 3 areas: education, healthcare and social services. Today, the refugees and their descendants total 5.9 million people. Since October, the situation has become critical in Gaza, and UNRWA has become the main provider of humanitarian aid. Refugees are spread out in 58 camps in Lebanon, Jordan and Syria, but also in towns across the West Bank, as well as in Gaza, where 75% of the population is registered with UNRWA. The agency is also one of the biggest employers of Palestinians. It provides work for 30,000 people, 13,000 alone in Gaza.
Oh, Steph, can I call him back? Steph Dujarric.
For what?
I don't know.
Call him back, and after that, you debrief me on your prep?
Yes.
I sit like this?
Yeah, but like that.
Like that?
Yes.
Now the agency's in the spotlight.
Okay.
So can we...
Today, it's Christiane Amanpour, CNN's top journalist, who's asked for an interview.
So,
So 3, 4.
that's 3. 4 is funding. What are you going to say about funding? We barely managed...
But that's related to number 3. If she asks what the impact of the allegation, the impact is on funding. We are running out of cash by the end of March. And unless we have a new contribution or a resumption from donors having suspended or frozen their contribution, we'll have no other choice than to end our operation.
They also alleged there were tunnels under UNRWA facilities like schools. How difficult is it to deal with a single authoritarian organization like Hamas when you are trying to deliver aid? Are you ever forced to compromise your values for that?
As an agency, we have not been forced to compromise because our mandate is really straightforward, is to bring to our school any children of the Palestinian refugees. And I have to tell you, Christian, that many times also the Hamas was not really pleased that these children were attending our school rather than the schools under the control of the de facto and the Hamas authorities. And they have always seen, in reality, UNRWA also as being a cultural threat.
Since taking power in Gaza in 2007, Hamas criticizes UNRWA's education system, saying it's not rigorous enough. Meanwhile, Israel says the school books are openly hostile to the Israeli state in Gaza and in the West Bank.
And anti-Semitism taught in UNRWA schools every day. UNRWA, with international financing, your financing, is grooming Palestinian children into terrorists.
Struggling to strike a balance, UNRWA tries to carry out the education work which is at the core of its mandate. The potential closure of its schools is seen as a disaster by the Palestinians.
This is a nightmare that I can't imagine. You are talking about millions of Palestinians in West Bank that will be without education, which is our future as refugee. Why? Because we don't have in Palestine, and especially in West Bank, we don't have a land to plant and to have a production of food to eat. We don't have petrol and oil. We don't have anything. Yani, our investment is in the person itself, in a human being.
Looking ahead to post-war Gaza, the issue of education is essential.
And I asked the Palestinian Authority to make sure that everything taught in our schools is completely in line with UNESCO standards and the core principles of the United Nations. So these topics I will bring up again with the president this morning. He asked for us to meet today.
The Palestinian president is isolated in his palace. Criticized for losing touch with the reality on the ground, Mahmoud Abbas has become very unpopular in the West Bank. In power for the past 20 years, he nonetheless remains at the heart of diplomatic affairs.
Nice meeting you. Good. Enough? Oh. Faut aller au fond, hein? Fais pas semblant.
I get instructions now.
Yalla.
Everybody is talking about the UNRWA.
I wonder why.
Yeah. Some of them are against the UNRWA,
Yeah.
and some of them are for the UNRWA. But we are for the UNRWA.
With the president, we discussed how important UNRWA's role would be during a transition period, which will start when there's a ceasefire. Today's meeting was very useful. The president also committed himself to encourage the countries of the Arab world that he visits to maintain or increase their support to UNRWA.
UNRWA's budget mostly depends on voluntary contributions from states. The agency was counting on $850 million, but when the allegations came out, some of the biggest contributors froze their funding. UNRWA has thus been deprived of more than half of its funds. The search for these hundreds of millions goes via New York. On the eve of the UN General Assembly, all support must be consolidated.
It's all the ambassadors that are attending. And so this is more or less to, speak to countries that really, are willing to support us as much as possible and to activate that group. And these are countries who can influence other countries also. And then we will go on to the UN.
So just on the first meeting, it's a good mixture. North, south,
exactly.
and also the region.
Yes.
And very useful for our discussion at the 4th and 5th committee.
Yeah.
Correct. No?
A decisive diplomatic marathon is taking place between the UNRWA team and the United Nations.
Great to see you, sir.
First, a meeting with Hungary's chief of diplomacy, a country reticent to support the agency. The Russian ambassador, a UN heavyweight, but whose financial support remains quite modest. And on to France, a contributor country whose support seems to be wavering.
That's okay with you? Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
A meeting's organised at the EU delegation with all 27 member states. The stakes are high. The European Union, one of the main pillars of UNRWA, has yet to confirm its funding.
€15 million are going to be going immediately to UNRWA. An additional €68 million will be given as an emergency funding for Palestinians in the whole region.
I expect a lot of support from the member states. Most member states are committed to Resolution 302. In fact, they are committed to the mission and mandate entrusted to UNRWA and will do all they can to assure their support until the day there will be a lasting and fair political solution for the Palestinian people. And from that day on, UNRWA will need to transition and finally hand over the keys to a new state.
193 states are invited to this extraordinary session.
Nice meeting you. Same here. Thank you. And thank you for organizing this session today.
It's a historic first for UNRWA.
Mr. President, Excellencies, I'm here today because UNRWA, the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees, is at a breaking point. The agency's ability to fulfill its mandate is seriously threatened. Your urgent action is needed to facilitate a political solution that will bring peace to Palestinians and Israelis, and in this context alone, allow the agency to transition. The agency cannot fulfill the mandate given by this Assembly without matching funding from its members.
First, we need to tell member states, beware. These attacks targeting the agency very clearly have a political agenda. And these accusations are, of course, coming from the Israeli representative. In fact, he's contesting the concept of the status of Palestinian refugees. He doesn't seem to see that if the status of Palestinian refugees still exists, it is because no political solution has been found to the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, and that the UN resolution has always been very clear. The issue of the right to return will be settled once the conflict has been resolved. The question of the right of return does not necessarily mean a physical return. It's a return based on recognition, a compensation for, how can I put it, the fate endured by the Palestinian refugees and their descendants.
Today, Philippe Lazzarini is at the Swiss Federal Palace to meet with members of parliament. He needs to ensure Switzerland does not freeze the 20 million francs promised by the Swiss Confederation. First among the socialists, and then the Greens, the head of UNRWA is preaching to the converted.
Je suis à Berne aujourd'hui pour rencontrer 2-3 groupes parlementaires.
It's a chance for these lawmakers to fine-tune their strategy.
Et le rapport final, ce sera fin avril.
D'accord. Et après, il y a encore le rapport Colonna.
C'est ça le rapport.
Ça, c'est le rapport Colonna.
Rapport d'enquête, je ne sais pas. Okay. Ça, c'est un processus complètement indépendant sur lequel je ne cherche pas du tout à m'immiscer. Ouais.
Mais donc fin avril. Donc c'est vrai que si la Suisse libérait la moitié déjà, en attendant ce rapport pour la deuxième moitié.
Ça serait une position en ligne avec.
La position, disons, oui.
Comme ça.
Et ça, oui. Non, mais je pense que c'est important de le faire rapidement. Enfin, on discutera en commission.
À bientôt.
Je vais t'amener en face parce que.
J'aurais dû me mettre plus la rue d'épreuve pour me préparer pour les autres. Exactement.
Il est 16h20. Voilà. On vous propose de vous installer.
Oui, non, absolument.
On va faire comme on est plutôt un petit groupe.
On the other hand, everything is still up in the air with the radical liberals.
Non, c'est bien. On va s'entourer.
Plutôt, pas tous là, je pense que c'est presque plus simple si on peut le faire ainsi.
I hope Switzerland will follow the lead of these countries who have maintained or resumed their funding. I hope that Switzerland, my country, continues its humanitarian tradition and continues to promote and apply humanitarian law in an equal way to all kinds of situations, as has been the case until now.
On the ground, the situation is deteriorating. On average, one employee of UNRWA is killed every day in Gaza. Meanwhile, Israel continues to block humanitarian convoys.
It's beyond a worrying situation. It's I feel that this agency that I work with, UNRWA, I feel that it's slowly dying. It's on its deathbed. And it needs urgently an injection of life. And with every day going, we are getting closer to the bottom.
We will need all our energy. Many of you start to be exhausted. I also think we have to be careful about a possible burnout of staff, because I can tell you this crisis is not over and is here to last.
It's just appalling. And everyone has told us we have never seen anything so horrible and dehumanizing in all of our humanitarian careers than what we are now seeing in Gaza. And we've seen our fair share of conflict. Some of them have been to Yemen, to Syria. Syria was also a very brutal conflict, Ukraine and others. But what is happening today in Gaza goes beyond all imagination. That's it. So why resign? We've been given a voice. That voice must be used.
This voice, Philippe Lazzarini wants to make it resonate among the inhabitants of Gaza. First stop, Cairo. The Egyptians and Israelis have just authorized entry into Gaza via the Rafah terminal. An Egyptian military plane has already been chartered. It's scheduled to leave an hour later, when suddenly there's a change of plan.
So we could do this.
So there you go. No more Gaza. My entry to Gaza has been rejected by the Israeli authorities. It's the first time that the head of an agency has been refused entry to the Gaza Strip. And we know it's not due to security reasons, because the other members of the mission and my teams have been granted permission to enter. So this is a targeted decision and a political decision. In fact, it is the central issue of the rights for Palestinian refugees that is at stake. And this is the reason why, as Commissioner General, I will continue to fight.